Hey guys, we got a new piece of equipment on the bench today. It is a Vivo Home 862D Plus hot air rework station. It's actually a combo rework station and soldering station. Um, when I was looking into getting a hot air rework station, I didn't know if I wanted to get a standalone unit or a combo unit. And this one I actually found on Amazon. I did actually buy this. This is not a free review exchange type deal. This is something that I bought. But the reason I chose this one was because it had the best reviews on it, and for the to get it in a combo station wasn't that much more expensive, and I figured it'd be handy to have a second iron on occasion anyways. But um, just kind of first glance at this, you can see that you got an air adjustment and a soldering temperature adjustment and a hot air temperature adjustment. And something I kind of like about this is that it's almost an analog over digital control. I know that's kind of strange to think about, but I like the digital display, but I really like the analog controls. So you're not having to sit there to push buttons or anything like that to try to adjust your heat. You can just turn your knob and go. And to be honest, a lot of times for hot air, you're actually not even going to use your digital readouts for anything other than maybe a quick glance to know that you're kind of where you want to be at. Uh, I have checked the calibration of the LCDs against the actual temperature output, and it seems to be within about 50 degrees Celsius. But it's really hard to calibrate temperatures on hot air stations unless you have the specs that they were actually calibrated to, which is going to be a certain tip size set at a certain temperature with a certain air speed, and with the thermocouple actually a certain distance away from that tip. So being inaccurate on temperature is something that I can let go of pretty easily. Now, word of warning, this is a really cheap rework station. I believe it was around 65 bucks just for this. So a lot of times what I like to do, especially with things like this, is to take it apart, not just to see what's inside, but also a lot of what makes these bad is poor quality control, and also just certain little items that they'll not do to these that make it different from a high quality thing. One of the things that I noticed whenever I took this apart is that there are some voltage regulators in here that weren't connected to heat sinks. And I decided just to try to see if maybe there was a reason they thought they can get away with that. Maybe they didn't get hot or anything. But one of them actually seems to be the regulator for the hot air gun itself, and it got really hot really fast. So I shut the machine down, and I actually went and I made some heat sinks, and we'll take this apart in a little bit, and I'll let you see inside of it and what I did with that. But that was the only thing that I found. I know there's people who found caps on backwards, caps that were just exploded on them, things like that. But that's one of the important reasons why you take one of these apart and actually check it yourself, because you can prevent a lot of the problems down the road just from that initial checkup. But we'll go ahead and right now I think we'll actually get this thing cranked up, and we'll go ahead and remove a chip off of one of the cheap multimeters that we have just to kind of see how it does. Alright, I've got the hot air station warming up. We're going to try to desolder a few of these chips. I'm going to use some flux just because I think it'll help the solder reflow a little easier. And it'll also be a little bit of a heat indicator for me, because we're going to preheat the board a little bit. I think these will be the ones we'll try out. preheating the board is actually a really important part of doing this, because you have to remember that you don't want the chip to be the thing to get hot. You want the solder to be the thing to get hot. And the solder is connected to the board, so if your board is cold, it's going to keep just sucking that heat away, sucking that heat away. So we're just going to give it a little bit of a warm up. You can see my flux starting to melt. I think we'll turn our air down to something about like that. A lot of using a hot air station just comes down to just practice and getting a feel for it more than set my temperature at this and my air at that, because it requires constant motion, and so you're not going to stay constantly at this same distance from the PCB to the tip of this gun. There's just no way. So you've got to kind of play with it and know when you need to move closer, farther away. And then whenever it's time to really get in there and start heating up these solder joints so that they'll come loose. Look how easy that was. I think that this little station here is going to be a game changer for me. Let's get down. Let's try some little smaller components. Let's try this capacitor here. Okay, how about a little bitty capacitor? How about this? I believe that this is a diode here. Let's try it. Man, I'm loving this thing. This would have been impossible before with just what I have soldering wise. I mean, there's just no way that I could have ever gotten that off that easily. I would have fought and probably ended up destroying the chips. As it is, I can use these chips on other devices if I need to. That's amazing. I wonder how it'll work on this button. Let's try it on this button. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do this yet. I wonder if I can kind of use my tweezers and kind of pry on it. Alright, so let's call that a fail on that button. But then again, it isn't really designed to do things like that. For something like that, a solder sucker would probably be the best bet. A vacuum station would be excellent for that. Oh look, did we lose another chip? Yeah, we lost this little chip, which I believe is an op amp. Try this little guy here. Wow. This station also has a cooling feature on the gun where whenever you actually turn the gun off, it does keep blowing for a little while in order to cool the element down. It's supposed to extend the life of the element, but you have to watch where you put it at because it will keep blowing hot air after a while, for a little while afterwards. And you want to make sure that you're not going to burn anything behind the gun. But I am really impressed for the price of that station. I'm really impressed with the way it works, and I think it'll be a great little station for me. Alright, so I think I've got everything set up to where we can see everything we'll need to see here. If you look down here, you'll actually see this voltage regulator has a heatsink on it, and then I think there's another one. Can't really see it. It's way in the back over here, but it's got a heatsink on it also. But these two up in the front here and here didn't have any heat sinks on them. And this one, which is actually always at the bottom of the machine's sideways right now, this one has something to do with driving the hot air gun, and it was getting really hot. So I just grabbed these. We actually cut these off of an extrusion we have at the shop here. This isn't actually heatsink material, but it's 6061 aluminum, and it's got a lot of mass to it. And so I figured it would be a good little heat sink, and just drilled and tapped it and put some little 8/32 screws in it just to hold it. This gray stuff right here is actually anti-seize because I don't have any thermal paste, but it's definitely improved it a lot. It does stay a lot cooler. Now, whether or not it would have broke, I don't know. I'm sure that it would have cut the lifespan down if we would have just left this flapping around. So that was the only thing that I noticed was out. You can see, let me see if I can set y'all up a little bit better. You can see there's really not a lot of circuitry here. There's looks like a little microcontroller here. On the other side of the board, the only thing I see is what must actually be the LED driver. But we've got a few filter caps and regulators, and there's a diode here. I don't actually see any full bridge rectifier. I do see an optocoupler down there. Another one here. Those must be actually running, separating the high and low voltages. At least they look like optocouplers. Maybe they're not. But it's really a minimum of circuitry on this thing. So it must depend a lot on this little microcontroller. The transformer looks really good. I don't really think I'll have anything to worry about on that. The fuse is one of the cheap little glass fuses, and it's a 10 amp, which seems a little high to me. We may actually check and see what this thing draws to see if we want to maybe downsize that fuse. Another issue, you probably can't tell really, but the insulation is actually stripped off of this red wire, and I can see some of the conductor in there. Focus. Focus. I think you can get that. See. But that's a fairly easy fix. And really, I find a lot of this stuff with these little cheap soldering stations, or hot air stations rather. If you give it a good once over and kind of check on stuff, and make sure all these capacitors are on the right way and things like that, they'll normally be good enough for hobby level stuff, which is what I do. I'm not going to use this every day. I think as often as I'll need it, it'll serve its purpose. And if I do find that it's not holding up, then I'll update to a better one. But that's kind of what the guts of it looks like. Let's see a little bit more of the instruction manual now. Okay. Okay, so I figured it wouldn't be fair to review a combination station by just doing the hot air rework stuff. So it did come with a soldering iron. I think that it'll be worth giving it a shot and seeing how it compares to the Heiko. I believe I have a FX888D. Now, I'll be honest, I am a little spoiled with the Heiko. This looks like it's supposed to be a copy of it, so I'm not expecting the greatest performance out of it, but I think that we should at least be able to work with it. I think to start off with, I think we should try to do one of these caps here. It didn't come with the chisel tip that I really like for the Heiko. I believe this is a 1.5 millimeter chisel tip, but this conical tip is the closest to it. They did have a really wide chisel tip, but I think that that's just too much. But I think we'll go ahead and maybe see how we can do on this little joint for this PTC. It actually looks like it took it pretty well. I might be able to desolder that pretty quick. But it didn't seem too bad there. Let's try. We've got a bunch of these resistors here. I think that'll give us a chance to have a pretty fair comparison. I'm not going to use flux on these because their joints aren't as critical as a those SMD components to get it to try to flow. And also, since we're not using hot air, I think we'll be a little bit better off without it. It looks like it puddles it pretty quick. We may actually want to set something up inside of a vise. Y'all can see that a lot better now. Let's try to do a little bit of trace tinning with this. I think that just dealing with this lead-free solder on this board is making it a challenge. I know it even makes it a challenge for the Heiko sometimes. It is melting. Doesn't seem like it's tying in very well. I don't think I can really blame the soldering iron for that. Let's try one of these smaller traces. More better. Yeah, there's definitely a difference. The Heiko is definitely able to put a lot more heat down onto the board. Let's give it a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people are going to argue how this isn't technically correct because in some cases the Heiko is preheating the board and letting the cheap one do the easy part, or vice versa. I mean, you can see a difference, but I'm not going to call this a bad soldering iron because it's cheap. You get what you pay for. And if you only doing little stuff, I think this soldering iron would actually be able to do what you need it to do. Alright, so let's take a look at this instruction manual. Like most imported Chinese manuals, it leaves a good bit to be desired. It's not really telling you a whole lot about how to operate the machine. It's really just telling you kind of how to desolder components. It's not giving you a whole lot of information on what certain things are for or any of that. It's really pretty sucky. So if you don't already know how to, or have at least a small idea of how their rework station is going to work, you're going to be lost if you're dependent on this. So I wouldn't really recommend the instructional value of this, but it does come with one, and it is almost written in something that could pass for English. After use, be sure to coo the unit. You might want to invest in a pigeon or something to do that. I'm not really sure. Do not disassemble a pump. It's got little things like that in it. But overall, sucky instructions. But the unit does actually seem decent. At least for what I'm going to do. Just always keep in mind, if you're a professional, if you're doing this for a living, you do want professional quality equipment. This one, honestly, is nowhere near that. But for a home gamer or just a regular hobbyist that's going to need, once a week is going to need to use a little bit of hot air, it's perfect. So the Vivo Home 862D Plus, highly recommended. It is also under a lot of different brands. The 862D Plus is going to be the model number across all of them. Prices vary a little bit. Like I said, this one was about 65 bucks. But all in all, good station. So I hope that helps anybody who's interested in buying this.